Spring is here, all the plants have woken up, the days are getting long and they're nice and warm, everything is alive, so it's a perfect time to harvest some plants and make some fertilizer. So I'm going to show you how I make my Korean natural farming, my fermented plant juice. Right here is a fig tree, and I'm really proud of this one. This one does really well for me, but every year it throws out all these new shoots trying to take off, so I have to prune it back a lot, which it gives me the perfect opportunity to go ahead and harvest these in order to make my fertilizer. Now with Korean natural farming, he says that you want to harvest the plant not on an extremely hot day or a really rainy day where it's washed away a lot of the beneficial microorganisms that are on these plants. Luckily for me, this tree is providing so much shade that it hasn't actually had any sunlight hit this area yet. So I'm going to go ahead and take off a lot of these, the tips of these, where they're going to have the most growth hormone, and we're going to use that to make my fertilizer. All right, so I've now harvested off all these shoots that I don't want growing from my fig tree, and we're going to go ahead and take all of this to go turn into the fertilizer. All right, so here we go. We have all of our cuttings that are fresh from the tree, and here is my jar that I will be doing the fermenting process in. This is a half-gallon mason jar. Depending on how much you cut though is dependent upon how big of a container you need to do this ferment. Now we're gonna need a couple other things. We're gonna need a scale, and we need brown sugar, a breathable lid, presumably like a napkin or cheesecloth, something along that line, and then a way to cover it. So either a rubber band, string, or like I'm using the ring. We'll go ahead and break down how to do the ferment. All right, so I have my brown sugar, a cup to measure it out, my scale to weigh it, and then a paper towel to cover my jar. So the first thing I'm gonna do is cut up all of this and then get a weight on it, so that way I know how much brown sugar I need to add in order to get a 1-to-1 ratio. So first I need to know how much my jar weighs in order to know how much plant material I just put into it. All right, so the jar weighs 1 pound, 12 ounces. So now that I know that, I can go ahead and cut all this up, put it in, reweigh it, and I'll know. So the whole point of this is to cut it up nice and small. That way we're allowing there to be a lot of surface area, so all the bacteria can go ahead and ferment this and break down all the nutrients in here and make it plant available. So that's what makes it such a good fertilizer. So I'm gonna work on cutting all this up, and then we'll go from there. All right, so I only used about half of it, and it filled the jar up completely. Now, we want to only fill this up about 2/3 to 3/4 the way full. So even though it's full right now, I know once I add the brown sugar in, I start mixing it, it's gonna start compressing the air pockets that are in here. So it'll break those up, and then it'll compress down, and it won't be this entire jar. Now, one thing I didn't say before was that you can use any plant. You want to grab the new growth off of any plant that you want to use to make your fertilizer. So even if you want to use weeds, that's perfectly fine. The only thing about it is that you want to stay within the same species. So with this, I would only want to take fig cuttings or fig leaves and branches and stems and make my fermented plant juice from that. I wouldn't want to take some leaves off of my banana and then also add that in. You only want to use just one plant for each ferment you do. All right, so I've weighed this out, and it's 1 pound of fig leaves and stems. So we're gonna go ahead and do 1 pound of brown sugar, and then I'll go ahead and add it in. All right, so I went and grabbed a little bit more sugar just because I'm a little short of that pound, and you wanna get about a 1-to-1 ratio, or you could even go a little bit more sugar depending on how wet the material is. All right, so now this is my 1 pound, and I'm gonna go ahead and just mix this in this bowl instead. That way it's a little bit easier to make sure it gets mixed in really well. You want to make sure the brown sugar is fully encasing all of the plant matter that's here. You really want to work it in, that way that brown sugar can start absorbing some of the moisture, and that will help with this fermenting process as well. All right, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take my clean stick here, and I'm just kind of mashing this down, compressing it, trying to get those air pockets out, so that way the ferment process can go on and hopefully we won't have any issues with it. All right, so I've compressed it down. I'm gonna take the last little bit of sugar, add that in, and then just kind of mix that in to the top layer. And then we will be done with the fermenting, the beginning parts to start the ferment. And then that will be it. That's all we need to do for our FPJ fertilizer. All right, so just a quick recap. I went and cut off some branches off my fig tree, but you can cut them off of any fresh growing plant that has nice new green growth on it. And then I cut it up even finer and weighed it out. So I know that this was 1 pound of fig leaves and branches. From there, I then got my brown sugar and I weighed out 1 pound. I mixed them together and I compressed them into the jar, and I can already see that the moisture is starting to get sucked out by the brown sugar, which is perfect. That's going to allow the microbes to do what they need to and break this down in a ferment. So from here, all I'm gonna do is take my paper towel. I'm gonna clean off my jar. I'm gonna use this to clean it off, get rid of all the brown sugar on the outside. That way I don't have to deal with any pests. I am done with this. I'm gonna go ahead and just put my napkin on top so that way it can still breathe during its fermenting process. You don't wanna put a solid lid on this because it will off gas, and those gases will then cause either you to snap your lid off or break your jar. So I'm just putting my lid on without the actual top and just my paper towel. So I'm gonna go ahead and write what this is. So now all I'm gonna do is go ahead and put this in a cool, dark place inside my house, probably in a cupboard. That way there's no light on it, it stays nice and cool. And this is gonna go ahead and ferment for about a week to 2 weeks, depending on how or what the temperature is inside of your house. All right, so what you can expect to see is that there will actually be a dark liquid down here, and then you'll have the plant matter and maybe still a little bit of sugar, or the sugar will have been completely consumed and used, and then you'll just have your nice dark liquid, which is your ferment. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this off, and I'll pick this up as soon as it's done and show you what we can do from here. It's been just over a week since I started my Korean Natural Farming fermented plant juice, or FPJ, that I took from the fig cuttings, or the tips of the new figs that were shooting out. So now we're gonna go ahead and harvest or extract out all of the ferment. So this is what my fertilizer will be, is all of the juices that are about to come out of here. I'm gonna go ahead and let this sit for a while because it's gonna take a while for all of it to work its way down. Okay, so I have all of the material inside of my funnel, and it's just slowly dripping out the last bits of it. But this is pretty close to about what I'm gonna get, maybe a little bit more, but not by much. I just wanna show you though how good this stuff is and why you wanna go through this process of fermenting it and then extracting it out instead of just composting it or just throwing it down on the ground to be a mulch and slowly break down over a long period of time. This is 1 gallon of water right here. And in order to give this a treatment, all I need is 4 milliliters. 4 milliliters is one of these, which is just a little 3 millimeter syringe. And then 1 more mil. So that right there makes 4 milliliters, and that's a 1 to 1,000 dilution ratio for this liquid fertilizer. So that's how strong that this is. You only need 4 milliliters, which is roughly 3/4 of a tablespoon. So not even a full tablespoon is enough fertilizer for 1 gallon. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this, and now, because these were all the new shoots that were coming up from the fig, it has all of those enzymes in it that were telling the tree to just grow upward and put on as much green growth as I can. So I've now harnessed that. So once I feed with this, it's gonna tell those little seedlings, like, look, we have this really good fertilizer, so we're gonna go ahead and put on a lot of green growth. And you only need to apply this once a week. And then once you go out into your garden beds, or however you plant, you can start diluting the dosage down to a 1 to 500 at its strongest. So that means 8 milliliters, which is a tablespoon and a half per every gallon. So even though this doesn't look like a lot of fertilizer, so let's just say there's, I don't know, 40 milliliters in here of my fermented plant juice, that 40 milliliters at a 1 to 1,000 dilution will make 160 gallons of fertilizer. And I get this doesn't look like much, but this is just for the video. I've actually done big batches in 5-gallon and 15-gallon drums where I've taken cuttings from either trees or grasses or weeds that have come up, and I've put them in, crushed them down, added my brown sugar, let it ferment and extract it out, and I got more than a gallon's worth. So I had made essentially 1,000 gallons worth of fertilizer from a 5-gallon bucket. One of the reasons why this is such a good fertilizer is because the microorganisms break this down in such a way that what they excrete out and leave behind, this liquid, is a readily available nutrient. So this is like an instant feed, but it's not synthetic fertilizers. It's been done naturally, so this is significantly better for your plants. You don't have to trust me. Try it for yourself and you decide. I've done this for a couple of years now, and I see such great growth and healthy plants. So I'm a believer and I trust this completely. So I will always use this method for growing my plants. So if you want to take your fertilizer to the next step and ensure that you're creating or feeding your plants and getting them as healthy as they possibly can be, there's a couple other things that you can do that are from the Korean natural farming practice. One of them is LAB, which is lactobacillus, which is a bacteria that breaks down organic matter really fast. There's also fish amino acids, and there's herbal nutrient. And they all do different things within helping your plant. So if you want to learn more about those things, go ahead and subscribe, because I will be coming out with a video on fish amino acids pretty soon. I already have a video on the herbal nutrient, and I also have a video on the LAB. So what we can go ahead and do now is we're actually going to take some of our herbal nutrient, which is just extracted herbs like garlic, cinnamon, and some others. And this is just promoting healthy plants. I'll take this and I'm going to grab out 4 milliliters as well for this 1 gallon of fertilizer. So that's a 1 to 1,000 dilution. And I think that's actually pretty strong. I think I could go with probably just 2 milliliters, because this stuff seems to be really strong and a little goes a long way. Now, next, I can go ahead and take some LAB, and this is just going to break down any of the organic matter in the soil with your plants, and anything that hasn't been completely broken down from your fertilizer will also be consumed by the LAB, and then that will in turn give it to your plant's roots, and keep them happy, healthy, and fed. So I'll also take 4 milliliters from here. I'll put this into my 1 gallon. And then fish amino acids, or FAA, that is also a 1 to 1,000 dilution. And depending on your plant, kind of dictates how much you need. As my plants are starting to fruit, I tend to be at a 1 to 1,000 dilution. But when they're new seedlings and they're just putting on their growth, I tend to go a little bit less, and I go with about half, so a 1 to 2,000 dilution. So I only use 2 milliliters for every gallon. And this one is really thick because you're using whole fish, and it takes quite a while to make FAA. So that's why it's going to be a few more months or weeks before I'm actually able to get my FAA video out. So be sure to subscribe, that way when it does come out, you can learn about that and decide if that's something you want to incorporate in your garden. So I'm going to go ahead, mix this up, let this FAA kind of dilute into the water more. But I just want to say, you don't need all of this. It's really nice, and you do see results from each different component. But you can just start out with the simplest thing, where it's going to be either fermented plant juice or LAB, and use just one of those, or use them both together. And then as you feel more comfortable with this, move on to the OHN or the FAA, so that way you can create a more complete fertilizer. Your plants will be happy even with just getting the fermented plant juice. All right, so that is all that I have for now. I'm gonna go ahead, take this fertilizer, and go feed my pepper plants that I just got in ground. I hope you learned something, and I hope you're gonna try this out yourself, so that way you can grow the best possible plants you can. All right, go out in the garden, go get dirty, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Do you think I'm a monster and I wouldn't show you me watering it in and not showing you that I actually use this? I hate that. I hate when a video will tell you how to do something, but they don't actually show them using it or explaining them using it. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and water in all my little pepper plants that I just put in the ground. They're a little behind because these were started late. That's all right though. With this fertilizer, they'll catch up in no time. And once the weather's warm, they'll be nice and big, ready to start producing lots of fruit. One last thing, you can absolutely use this as a foliar feed as well.